This morning's reading is from Genesis 25. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it's to be this way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger." When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore he was called Edom. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Here ends the reading. Thanks be to God. This story from Genesis 25 is a story that is somewhat familiar to us in that it's the kind of story that people or peoples tell about themselves and their cultures. How we came to be, where we're going, what we're doing. In this case, Israel seems to be asking, why are we farmers and they, the Edomites, why are they hunter-gatherers? Why are we here and they there? What kind of people are we? What kind of people are they? Of course, these kinds of questions have been asked since the dawn of humanity. Who are we and who are they? In our time and in this particular moment, theologian Willie Jennings says that the narratives that shape American life are not shaped so much by who are we and who are they, but in fact by competing desires. The desire to imagine a life shared together with others, people of other races and cultures and languages and faiths. A desire to belong to a human global community where people genuinely understand, appreciate, and love their neighbors. And a desire, another desire, that is running alongside the first, which is to segregate ourselves, to lead a more segregated existence, to be apart from others. And when we hear the word segregated in American culture, of course we hear something about policies and practices that we readily disown. We hear in our mind's eye Jim Crow. We hear separate but unequal. Segregation is something that has a sordid history in our American past. Yet it is fully and completely a part of our American culture, and it's here today. It's not just something from the 1960s, and it's not just something that has racial connotations. We see just how pervasive segregation can be when we look not just the events of 60 years ago, but how we actually live our lives today. In America, we lead very segregated lives, but in ways that are so fundamentally part of our culture that they're easy to miss. We take them for granted. Farhad Manjoo wrote an amazing piece for the New York Times this week. Its subject was about the idea that we might someday take private cars off the streets of our cities. He imagines a Manhattan in the future without any private cars there at all. In fact, he said, as a prophet would, that he had seen the future, and he'd seen a future without cars. And he thought that it could be glorious. To be sure, not everybody sees such a future that way. But that's probably because the American imagination has only ever gotten as far as imagining an ideal, a perfect existence, which would be being in a 1,000-pound air-conditioned metal cage all by ourselves. Now that's a segregated existence. It's also one to which most of us have aspired. If we can be all alone, of course, we will be. All of our suburbs, especially in places now that have more modern development, we can see the American ideal taking root. Places like Florida and Arizona and other locales, you drive by modern suburban communities, and you have to drive by, of course. You have to drive by because there's barely ever a bus lane or a bike lane. There's barely infrastructure for pedestrians, and there's certainly not a tram or a train or a subway. And when you drive by, you'll pass by walls and walls and walls that are only interrupted by gates. And some of those gates will have security pads where you'll have to type in a special code in order to enter. And of course, in the fancier places, there are security guards letting only the right people in. Now that's a segregated existence. Where my parents live in Georgia, in a place with a gay and a guard, their congressional election this year will have a candidate who is doing ads on the local airwaves where he holds an AR-15 in his hands. And he lets people know that he believes it's his job to keep the hordes of looters from Atlanta away from their neck of the woods up in the North Georgia hills. We'd like to believe that we in America are actively pursuing an ideal, that we are hoping for something other than a segregated existence. But in fact, our politics and our infrastructure often represent a different kind of ideal, an imagined future of isolation with walls and gates and transportation that is only for us. And that's a segregated existence. It's the American ideal. We have a culture that is, of course, pervasive. And in some ways, it's glorious too. The open road, Route 66, driving all across the American West, seeing places like Monument Valley. Oh my gosh, how beautiful, how glorious. But of course, that American ideal doesn't actually get lived out in reality very often. It's replaced by traffic and smog and aggression, so that even as we aspire to be segregated, to be alone as much as possible in our vision for the ideal, we do so even though we know it's actually killing us. The smog is killing us. The traffic is ruining the air, but it's also ruins us. We take on different personas when we drive, suddenly impatient, reckless, aggressive, as if gunning it through a yellow light will make a significant difference to the quality of our days rather than sitting and waiting for the red. How could we possibly be delayed another 30 seconds? All the water that we take from one place and we pour it into the ground in another to produce grass in yards for one person or one family. It's amazing how we take for granted the use of God's gifts in order to preserve a segregated existence. Jacob and Esau, they represent two different peoples. Jacob represents the Israelites, and his character in Genesis 25 explains their story, who they are, how they came to be. He's blessed by his chosenness, and it's his burden to carry. He's constantly in conflict with others, especially his brother. He cheats his brother, his twin brother, Esau, who represents the Edomites, a people that lived in what we now know as southern Israel and Jordan, where farming was nearly impossible due to the arid conditions. And so the Edomites were hunters and gatherers and traders. They were different from the people to the north, the Israelites, who had more fertile land where they could grow certain crops. And the text initially seems to support this idea of a segregated existence between the two peoples. And you can see the tale spun by the biblical authors. The boys, they are connected. Jacob, born second, is holding on to Esau's heel. It's almost as if an adult and other person has to come along and pry them apart. But the Bible makes this affirmation that they come from the same place. These two different peoples, they come from the same place, the same womb, the same human womb. They come from the same parents. They once shared an existence together in the same womb. And what does one make of the lentil stew and the stealing of the birthright? Jacob is born holding on to Esau's heel, but he is also, in fact, a heel. If we were to talk about this story using wrestling terms and WWE terms and WCW terms, I'm not sure what the most modern iteration of professional wrestling is, but if Jacob were to be a professional wrestler, he'd come out to the ring dancing and gloating and boasting and laughing with his background music blaring, and the crowd would be booing him thumbs down. This guy's a trickster. He's a cheat. He'd do anything to get ahead. But the crowd is, of course, in on the cosmic play at hand. We know it's all something of a setup. We know that the brothers will get into the ring and they'll wrestle and they'll actually hurt each other. There'll be lots of drama. Chairs smashed across each other's backs and step ladders will be brought out, and Esau will jump from 8 feet up and land on Jacob, and Jacob will pull Esau's ears, and there'll be pile drivers, and then someone from the crowd will hurl insults, and the referee in the middle will lose all control. Jacob in this wrestling match, he's the heel. He's the heel. He's the devious one. He is one who scandalizes others. But like the wrestling match, like any wrestling match, what's hidden from our eyes is that eventually, once all of the sweat and the blood and the cheap tricks and the insults have subsided and the crowd has stopped being entertained and scandalized by the maneuvering of the two central actors, they'll depart the ring and go backstage. And they'll break character. They'll reconcile. They'll embrace. Which I know is a weird, completely ridiculous analogy, professional wrestling and Jacob and Esau. But what's hidden from us at the outset of the Jacob and Esau narrative as the wrestling match takes place, what's totally hidden from us is what happens backstage, is what happens at the end after the match, after they're done tussling and bleeding all over each other. Is that as they come into the world touching each other, the narrative of theirs will end up closing with an embrace. By the time you get 8 chapters further in the book of Genesis, after all of Jacob's attempts to carve out an existence just for himself and his family and his people, Jacob and Esau will reconcile. And it is one of the most stunningly beautiful, intimate moments in the entire Bible. In chapter 33, the text says that they will fall into each other's necks, these two men. They kiss. They cry together. They hold each other. They touch as they touched before they were born. Recognition that they belong to the same human family. Two people from the same mother and the same father who had fought bitterly trying to carve out their own segregated existence. They walk together, these two brothers sharing stories, falling over each other to be kind to one another. Can you believe, given what we read this morning, from the moments of their younger years, that reconciliation could be possible for these two? Can you believe that instead of striving for a segregated existence full of self-interest, that Jacob would turn to Esau in chapter 33, verse 10, and say, truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God. What? Jacob looks at Esau and says, truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God. The debate for us in America, in modern America, is in so many ways not about left, right, or center politics. It's about whether we wish to pursue a segregated or a shared existence and how we want to do that. Of course, in that framework, one posture is for fists to be clenched, to hold on to what's ours. And in the other, palms are open. One view holds that streets are for people, and another that streets are just for me. One view holds that water is mine, and another holds in our view, our American view, which is undeniable now, has been that the ideal, the dream, the greatest hope that we can envision is life behind a wall or a gate. The very definition of a desire for a segregated existence. It's hard to say. Truly, to see your face is like seeing the face of God, when my face or your face is behind a wall. Now, COVID-19 is a devil. It is a devil, it's a scourge, it's a demon. And it's particularly devilish because while we know a lot about how people can become sick, there's so much that we don't know. We can't predict exactly who will become really sick beyond generalities. And we can't predict when people will become sick beyond any generalities. The question over opening schools is fraught with calculated risks that are not fully knowable in this moment. Everyone's got a story about why they think that everything is going to turn out fine in the fall, or why things will be deeply problematic. COVID-19 has really been a devil. As they say, the learning had better be good considering the costs. Jason Denny was a patient recently at an Orlando hospital. He's Catholic. He'd been administered prayers and last rites by a priest. His family had said goodbye to him via FaceTime. Of course, if the families of patients can't come in to hospital rooms, the only people coming into Jason's room were people like the housekeeping staff, people like Rosaura Quinteros, originally from Guatemala. She came into Jason's room to clean. And at this point, housekeepers, as so many have done forever, will also serve as chaplains. They try to lighten the mood with smiles or jokes, provide encouragement when patients lose hope, provide an ear when patients need to process. The story on CNN said that this housekeeper from Guatemala, Rosaura, and a retired Air Force colonel, Jason, they met in a hospital room in Florida, both Catholics. Slowly, one began to heal the other through prayer, through conversation, through encouragement, through being willing to look the other in the eye. Jason said after he was released, "I don't think she realized at the time what she was doing for me. She was saving my life." In Florida, the place that perhaps best symbolizes the American ideal for a segregated existence. A place where streets are for cars, not people. A place where walls and security gates are pervasive. A place that has had its fair share of toxic politics built on fear. In Florida, this devil, this demon, COVID, this evil demon has put people in a place where existence at times is now, in fact, shared. And in a hospital room in Florida, with nowhere else to go, a man can, in his own way, say to the housekeeper in his room, "Truly, to see your face is like seeing the face of God." Imagine that. Rosaura came to clean your room, and she left having saved your life. People of hope, it's not about right, left, or center. To hope, to live in hope, to be a hope for others is to believe in a shared life where all can prosper. And for that to happen in our society, a lot is going to have to change. But know this, even with this devil, COVID-19 among us, hope keeps threatening to find a way through. May you, may I, may we work towards a shared existence, where more frequently we can say to others, perhaps even others that we've just met, "When I look into your face, I now see the face of God." May God's peace be with you all.